Whatever your attitude to the women's movement, it can't be denied that in the past it raised some interesting and important issues about social organisation and gender roles. It encouraged men and women to consider social norms that they might otherwise have taken for granted and as accepted as inevitable and immutable. And not even the most traditional amongst us would deny that some of the changes that it engendered have been positive. But what we're seeing now is the negative side of feminism. It now does little more than promote its own brand of sexism, promoting its own prejudice, that is, prejudgments, which exactly mirror the kind of sexist, closed-minded thinking that the movement set out originally to challenge. And it justifies its own brand of in-group preference with reference to the patriarchy, which is a term bandied about a lot, but left conveniently undefined. And they use terms like male privilege, again, the nature of which is left very, very vague. Well, much has been said about the impact of feminism on the attitudes of men and women, and how its influence has soured relationships between the sexes, its negative impact on the family, negative impact on marriage. But that's not what I want to consider today. I'm interested in something I think is actually far more important, and that's the impact that feminism has had on our institutions. And that's why I've called this clip "The Long March Through the Institutions in Heels." I am, of course, referring to the Long March Through the Institutions, which is a phrase that was coined by some German Marxist in the 60s. What he was doing was referring to a strategy whereby his revolutionary friends and him would enter professions, enter the institutions of the state, and once they got in, they'd start subverting those institutions' values and twisting those institutions to work for the new utopia, the new socialist utopia that they dreamed of. Well, that might have seemed pretty far-fetched and wacky back in the 60s, a pipe dream, a hope, a fantasy. But, well, that's exactly what's happened. We've got feminists, and we've got progressives, we've got woke types who have got into institutions, got into corporations, got into departments of state, got into the media, and they are subverting those very institutions that we depend on to keep society functioning properly. And one of the things that feminism has done very successfully is that it's promoted a cultural shift away from the principle of universalism, that is the idea that everyone should be treated the same, regardless of class and race, sex and religion. And they've moved towards a principle of intersectionality, which is an idea which is a total inversion of one of the key principles of liberal societies. Intersectionality is a philosophy that argues that you must take account of an individual's immutable characteristics, that in fact the most important thing about a person is the identity group or groups to which they belong. To these kind of people, to treat people the same, irrespective of their immutable characteristics, is to be acting unjustly. So fairness from the position of an intersectionalist requires that different rules apply to different groups. And as a consequence, in the name of social justice and equality, you can discriminate against people you consider to be relatively privileged, and you can promote people without merit if you believe those people belong to a group that have been historically disadvantaged. Now, intersectionality is very popular with all identity group activists, but it's feminists that jumped on this bandwagon first, and they've been pushing it heavily since the 80s. And why do they love it so much? Well, it's very simple. For the feminist, history is simply the history of male oppression of women. By rejecting ideas of meritocracy and universalism, they can justify giving themselves privileges, social privileges, things like all women shortlists and affirmative action, special projects, state resources. If they believed in meritocracy and genuine equality of opportunity, it would be very, very difficult for them to justify any of these measures. Intersectionality gives them a philosophical basis to actually be prejudiced, to actually be discriminatory, without being held to account. Put very simply, intersectionality is a justification for social double standards. And as women have gone into the professions, got into positions of power in institutions, in corporations, they've carried this idea of intersectionality with them and are acting accordingly. And you can see examples of this in all areas of life. Policing, in the criminal courts, in the family courts, in the health system, in publishing, film industry, music, education, human resources departments, all operating double standards that work against men, and all feeling perfectly fine about it, and actually feeling good about it, seeing this as working for a higher cause, for a good cause, working for social justice. I used to hear men's rights activists talking about men becoming second-class citizens, and I've got to say, I always thought that was pretty far-fetched. But now, look around, it's actually becoming a reality, and I don't think most men realise how far things have changed, how far things have gone. I could give 1,000 examples of double standards that we take for granted, that benefit women and work against men. I'd just like to give you one little example. I was Googling this before I started the clip. One of the biggest killers of men in the UK is prostate cancer. 1 in 40 men will die of prostate cancer. One of the big killers of women in the UK is breast cancer. 1 in 38 women will die of breast cancer. So the fatality rates of these two cancers are pretty much the same. But what's interesting is one of these cancers has a national screening program and one of them doesn't. You probably won't be surprised if I tell you it's prostate cancer which doesn't have the national screening program. But you should be surprised because apparently we live in a male-dominated patriarchal society. Surely society should be organised for our benefit, and if there are resources in the National Health Service that's going to be spent anywhere, they would be spent benefiting men, wouldn't they? I think situations like this come about for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is that women operate as a class. Feminism has actually derived, a lot of its philosophy derived from Marxism. Marxists saw society as being basically a fight between two classes, the bourgeoisie and the working class. And feminists see society as a battle between men and women. Women have been encouraged to operate as an interest group, people with common interests, common values that should work together. And that's really how women think. There is a kind of sisterhood. Men, on the other hand, tend to be far more individualistic. There is no concept of a brotherhood. And the idea of the patriarchy is a feminist myth. Men don't work or don't think as a collective group. They don't see themselves as having a common purpose in the same way that women have been encouraged to do. Even women who don't consider themselves to be feminists still have this sort of mindset, because it's indoctrinated through the education system, that women have been an oppressed group and now should work together to change society for the better. And when I say for the better, so it's better for them. And as a consequence, when they get into institutions, when they get into the media, when they become politicians, they're very much interested in furthering the interests of their group. They're happy to act in a discriminatory way, and they have a philosophy which allows them to do so without feeling that they're doing anything wrong. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, men have always been sexist, men have always discriminated against women, and I have to say, there is a little bit of truth to that. It might be the case that women have been discriminated against in certain professions in the past. And to my mind, that's not always a bad thing. I personally don't want to see women in the army. I don't really want to see women in the police force or in the fire brigade. I know that's very sexist, but I don't. But my reason for that is not ideological. It's nothing to do with social engineering. I just don't think women can perform as well in those particular professions. But I would never accept any discrimination against a woman who could perform as well as a man in a given role. That for me is just common sense. That's what meritocracy is about. You give jobs to the people who can do them best. And feminists are right in saying that if we live under a meritocratic system, we're not going to get a 50-50 split in professions. And they want that, but I don't. I don't see that that's a good thing for society. I don't think it's a desirable thing for society. I think there's a natural distribution of talents between men and women, and we complement each other, and that's a good thing. So there are going to be professions in which women are predominant and professions where men are predominant, and we should just accept that natural division of labour. But feminists don't like the concept of a market. They don't want a free labour market where the best people get the jobs. They don't want a free market of ideas. They much prefer to censor, well, people like me. What feminists really want to do is to pick winners. They want to decide the shape of society. They want to decide the allocation of resources. They want to decide who gets to be celebrated. They want to decide who gets to make the films and write the books, who gets to be rich, who gets to be supported. In short, they want to socially engineer society and shape it in a way that works best for women and at men's expense. And as more and more women enter positions of power and influence with ideas of intersectionality at the forefront of their minds, they're going to have an opportunity to do that. Well, I'm glad I got that off my chest. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Till next time.